So here we are, the third Marvel film to drop in the second half of 2021. Is it any good? Uh, let's talk about Marvel's Eternals. So I've been a long time MCU fan since the first Avengers dropped in 2012. But I've always accepted that while the quality's always been pretty reasonable, it's not always been top tier filmmaking. They've rarely produced any actual duds. Looking at you, Thor 2, but also rarely produced any really outstanding films. And unfortunately, I think this really leans more towards the dud side of the spectrum. So this film follows the latest superhero team to be introduced by Marvel, in addition to the Avengers, the Revengers, the Guardians of the Galaxy. We're going to include as Guardians of the Galaxy. Can do. And this features no less than 10 superheroes to introduce and develop. Immediately, this is where the cracks begin to show. When Marvel started the MCU, they very smartly introduced all of their main Avengers in separate standalone films before bringing them together so you had a solid connection to them way before they came to play at the group table. However, in Eternals, it's left some particularly clunky dialogue, as characters introduce themselves or address each other really unnecessarily by their first names. But despite all that, it still seems like you're getting to the halfway point before you even find out some of these characters' names. Gemma Chan looks to be the main heart of the show. She does the best with what she has, but it's not long before she's left to the mercy of weak dialogue or even later on no real dialogue at all. Besides her, there are some other big names in the cast, the likes of Richard Madden from Game of Thrones, Salma Hayek, and Kumail Nanjiani. I promise you, I have no idea where that picture came from. Angelina Jolie is also making her Marvel entrance, but is disappointingly sidelined, despite giving one of the most heartfelt performances when she's given the room to flex. Now the shame of having this great cast is, particularly early on when they're bringing the team together, there's some really awful wooden dialogue in there, and a whole slew of jokes that fall flat and just miss the mark entirely. What made the first Avengers so good was their ability to fill the quieter moments with snappy banter and not have to rely on the spectacle of the big action set pieces to drive the film. Unfortunately, that just doesn't seem to work here. Between individuals, there does seem to be some genuinely tender moments, but as a whole group, it just doesn't seem to work. Now, considering how big the cast is, it's a wonder that this also includes a comedy tag-along in the second half of the film. To me, this definitely seems like a Disney edition, carrying over from their cartoons. And you have to wonder why they've decided to bring this into the Marvel films, particularly when it worked to also pretty poor effect in Shang-Chi. Now, having said that, I will say that this tag-along did give rise to the only genuine laugh I have from the film. So the plot starts simple enough. It follows the Eternals, who are out to stop the Deviants, the latest CGI bad guys. They basically seek to kill humanity. That is literally about it from the start. This develops a little bit through the film and does give rise to some, at times, very literal backstabbing. And overall, the emergence of two villains. One who seems to have some more interesting ideas, and the other who will surely go down as one of the very worst of the MCU by a long shot. Now, given how bad some of the MCU villains have been to date, that is not exactly high praise. This villain literally only obtains the ability to speak in the final third of the film, and what's coming out is pretty much all nonsense, until they are eliminated pretty unceremoniously. Overall, the rest of the plot is just as much of a mess, I would say, as to what the rest of our heroes are trying to stop. It starts out as basically one long fetch quest, as our heroes aim to rebuild the team after being separated for centuries. This does give rise to another grievance, which is just repeating what is going on over and over again as they re-meet each of our heroes. To the film's credit, I will say, possibly bordering into slightly spoilerish territory here, there are a couple of deaths of characters throughout the film, and this does add some weight to the proceedings. One of the common complaints for the MCU is that there have been no real stakes, but here you honestly don't feel like any of the characters are invincible. Equally, for this one good decision of having a bit more risk involved, there are so many bafflingly stupid decisions made by characters, such as some characters seemingly changing motivation for no reason at all. And at the end of the day, there are very little ramifications for some of the choices made. One of the characters literally disappears before the final fight, only to return after all the dust has settled, while another changes sides completely, for no reason, and none of this has any real repercussions at the end of the film. Now, some of the action sequences can be pretty entertaining, and seeing them work together as a team to fight the bad guys is way more entertaining than any of the group dialogue. But for every cool encounter, there's also one that looks clunky or just doesn't elicit any feelings of energy or emotion at all and just completely fall flat. Not to mention that some of the costumes just really do not look good. They have that flexible leather kind of MCU look, but I've got to say that with all the colours across the screen, it really just does come off as bad Power Rangers cosplay. Now that's coming from a huge Power Rangers fan, so please try harder, Marvel. It's a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to the special effects as well. Some do look cool. I particularly like how their powers are represented by all these sort of gold rings, and it gives it this sort of ancient technology vibe to it. And the effects of the super speed in Makari, who was included in some of the more entertaining fight scenes, does look great. But equally, as with any CGI-reliant film, there are some pretty ropey moments too, especially some truly terrible characters in the mid-credit sequence. Honestly, if you've bought into all the other CGI mess up until now, this will just make you laugh at how bad it is. Overall, there are a number of other bizarre inclusions in the film. A reference to both Batman and Superman in a Marvel film is pretty odd, but does ask the question, are we leading to a DC Marvel crossover and saying that these characters exist in a different multiverse? Honestly, I'm sure this is something Marvel has thought about, and probably at this point they're just seeing raining dollar bills. There's also a lot of moving and new pieces set up and introduced, with a lot still up in the air and unresolved by the time the credits wrap. Now, given how many films and series there have been since Avengers Endgame, this is obviously a massive risk, having so much outstanding. But with so many things unanswered and up in the air, I've got to say it does make you a little bit concerned as a Marvel fan for what they've got in store for the rest of the MCU and what their big plot going forwards is. So, can I recommend it? I've given it a pretty negative overall review, but let's just say that Marvel is kind of like pizza. Even bad pizza is kind of better than no pizza. I did enjoy it in a bit of a so trashy it's kind of good sort of way, but it's definitely not one that I'm going to feel I need to revisit for a while. Considering as well how separate the story seems to be in connection to the rest of the MCU, any casual fan can probably skip over this one. And so my final verdict is going to be wait for it to come out on streaming, catch the post-credit scenes on YouTube. So there we go. That was my thoughts on Marvel's Eternals. Definitely not one of their best films, but still some entertaining bits throughout if you can put up with all the rubbish in the plot. Have you seen it? What do you think is the worst Marvel film apart from this one? Let me know in the credits down below, and I'll catch you guys in the next.